We're talking with Lenore Levine Seltzer Cohn this morning. It is February the 1st, 2009. Now, how do you like to be referred to?
Well, I've taken the name Linkie legally over 30 years ago, so Linkie is my real name. My husband, Henry, my second husband, passed away over a year ago, and I've decided to go back to my first husband's name, who was Marcus Seltzer, so from this point forward, my name is going to be Linkie Seltzer.
And what is your address?
5200 Keller Springs Road, Suite 724, Dallas, 75248.
And where were you born?
Dallas, at St. Paul Hospital.
When?
Oh, my birth date? Okay, November the 22nd, 1925. I can't believe it, but I'm 83 years old.
Are you first generation American?
I am.
Where were your parents from?
My mother was born in Russia, in Odessa, and I think my father was born in London only because they were on their way to the United States. And so he was born in London, England.
Mm-hmm. How did they come to Dallas?
Well, first they stayed in New York City, like most Jews, and there was part of the family that had come to Oklahoma. And somehow or other, another part of the family came to Dallas. And so that's why they came to Dallas. And thank goodness, instead of Oklahoma.
Now, do you know the circumstances they left the countries that they were born in?
Well, I think the pogroms were very, very, very busy then. I think it's like Fiddler on the Roof.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. Mm-hmm. And they were lucky enough to get out.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did your daddy do when he came to Dallas, or to the States first and then to Dallas?
My father,
Mm-hmm.
he went into the Army when he was old enough and was in France. I think he was in the health, he took care of sick soldiers. When he came back, he moved to Dallas, and he and my mother married. They ran away to Fort Worth and eloped and got married in Fort Worth. And then what he started out doing was not what he ended up doing. He worked for someone in a car lot, I think, possibly, but then he became a traveling salesman. He sold ladies' ready-to-wear, and he traveled a 5-state area, which was the way to do it then. And he had one wonderful story I'd love to tell you. It's real funny if it's okay. He used to go to New Orleans. That was one of his territories. And he had this woman who always complained about everything he showed her. And so he sent his driver downstairs and said, "You catch everything I send you, because I'm going to be throwing things to you." So she comes up and she's ready to buy, and she starts complaining, and he says, "You don't like this one? Fine, we'll get rid of it," and throws it out the window. And that's the way it went, and she finally stopped complaining and started buying. So my father was very, very successful in that field. I mean, he was traveling on train to begin with, then he traveled in the car with dirt roads. I mean, I'm going way, way back.
Give me a time era, and also, when they married, how did your mother come to Dallas?
The families were related, and so that's how they came.
Okay.
As well. She was 3 years old when they came to the United States. so in New York, and they stayed in New York while she got her education. And they were so poor that she didn't have a pair of shoes to wear to her grammar school graduation. And a friend of the family gave her a pair of shoes. And they were also so poor that she couldn't graduate from high school because she needed, as the oldest child of 5, she needed to go to work to help support the family. Her father, my grandfather, Max, that adorable man, I bet you remember him, the cleaner, Max Rafkin.
Sure.
Of course you do. Anyway, he was a cleaner and he couldn't make a living. He really had a tough time. So she went to work. She didn't graduate from any educational system, and yet I considered my mother one of the smartest women I knew. Anyway, and my father was the ultimate salesman. And so they worked together eventually in a business, and they ended up buying the business called Michael Modes. And they were very successful, not hugely successful, but moderately successful, and enjoyed a lovely way of life. I was born when my parents lived on Browder Street, okay? And I'd like to tell the story of how I got the nickname Linkie. My uncle, Duddy Rafkin, was very good friends with Erwin Wallman. And they were sitting on the front porch. This is the story I've been told for years. They were sitting on the front porch waiting to hear the baby was born. So the baby was born, me, and they told them that my name was going to be Lenore Joyce. Well, Erwin Wallman did not like that name. And he said, I'm not going to call her that. I'm calling her Linkie. So Erwin Wallman is the one who gave me my name. And I'll always be grateful for that, because it's been a name that's been, most people say I've never heard of it. Oh, what a cute name. It really has helped me throughout my years. I took it legally because I went into I went into an industry that I needed my name to be remembered, the speaking industry. Mm-hmm. So let's go back to your questions.
Okay. Where was the family living when you were born? In which part of town?
On Browder Street.
On Browder Street. How long, when did they move? Or what was the next address?
Oh, I have no idea. I was an infant. We stayed on Browder Street for quite a while. Because my father was traveling, my mother lived with her parents.
Ah.
Got it? Okay, and the Wiles lived on Corinth, and mother's sister Lil and Max Weil lived down the street, and the Einhorns and the Bachs, Joe Bach, his family, the ones who sold chickens and eggs. So,
But did you not live on Park Row?
yes, but that was later. We moved, the first time I remember is when we had moved on Wendelken in South Dallas. Real South Dallas.
What was the address?
Oh, I don't remember.
Do you remember about the year? How old were you when you moved to
Well,
Wendelken?
probably about 4, 5, because we lived at 2 different addresses on Wendelken. Further south, and then we came up north on Wendelken, and we lived in a duplex. And our next door neighbors were the Caspers, who now, I'm sure you have, Lois and Howard Wolf on tape. And if you don't, they would be wonderful ones to have. Anyway, we lived on 3711. God, why does that come into mind? Anyway, I started school at Colonial Avenue Grammar School, and I went there for 5 years.
Colonial Hill, maybe?
Colonial Hill, yeah. what did I say, Avenue? No, Colonial Hill.
Okay.
And then my parents had done well enough that they bought a home, their very first home, and it was on Park Row. And I do remember that address.
Which?
2410 Park Row, directly across from the Hebrew school. That was fun.
Now, what is the extent of your Jewish education?
Interesting. I ran across my confirmation class thing, which I could show you. I grew up at Temple Emmanuel. My mother worked at Temple Emmanuel as secretary to Aline Rutland. I don't know if you remember that name.
And what was her role?
She was secretary to Rabbi Lefkowitz. So I grew up at Temple Emmanuel. Rabbi Lefkowitz was the rabbi. I was in the junior choir. I was confirmed there. Mark and I were married there. And because Mark's family was Orthodox, and they belonged to the little Romania, you say it. Anyway, and also on Park Row, and we couldn't join there because the men sat on one side and the women sat upstairs. And I said, I don't think I can do that, Marcus. So we decided we would compromise. I grew up at Temple. He didn't like the organ. And I didn't like his. So we compromised and went to Cherith Israel. And so we belonged to Cherith Israel for all the years that our children grew up there. Our 3 children. Adrian was our oldest. Kathy Brenda was our next. And Robert Michael was our 3rd child. So, do you want to go or shall I go? Because I've got stories.
Go ahead.
Okay, so when Mark and I married, we were very fortunate because that was right after the war and it was difficult to find a place to live.
What year?
We married in 1946. But before that I need to go back because from Colonial Hill, when my parents moved to Park Row, I started going to John Henry Brown and graduated from grammar school from John Henry Brown, which reminds me of a neat story. Louis Rubin and I were chosen by the Mrs. Boone, I think was her name. She was the head of the school. At those days, we used to save money, and we were chosen to pick up the money each week and take it to the bank or wherever. And we had our pictures in the paper. I wish I had that. Anyway, then we all graduated from John Henry Brown, and a big contingency of Jewish kids went to Forest Avenue High School, where we graduated in 1943. And I married Mark in 1946. But in between that time, I was always a dancer. My mother had given me dancing lessons when I was 5 years old, and I'll always be so grateful to her for that. In 1946, I auditioned for a professional company called the Dallas Starlight Operettas. And amongst a few other Dallas dancers, I was chosen, which was wonderful. And I did that for 43, 44, and then again 44, 45, and then I went away to, my first year I spent at SMU, and because Mother wouldn't let me go away to college like everybody else. So I was in second year, she let me leave SMU and go to Austin.
You want to talk a little bit about being in the Starlight musicals?
Oh, I'd love to. Hold on. Would you like to see some pictures? I've got pictures. In fact, this is something that someone put together. I don't know why. But here I am dancing. Can you see any of these, Debbie?
No.
Huh? Here I am, young, dancing, always dancing. And I love this one. Can you see these? Help me, Ginger. Yeah. Can you see these? They're big enough. And here's Starlight Operettas. In 1941, they started the operettas and stopped them during the war in 1942, resumed again in 1943. And I danced for 2 years. Here's one picture, but I have others if you'd like to see it. Here's the line of dancers. Interestingly enough, I was chosen out of the chorus to dance with a young man who was coming to Dallas as a featured dancer with his partner. His partner got sick, so they chose someone to dance with him, and my peers chose me to dance with him. And I even got mentioned in John Rosenfield's, golly, he was a tough cookie. John Rosenfield even mentioned me by name in his column, his review of that particular show, which was Anchors Aweigh. That was a highlight.
With whom? Who was the male dancer?
Bill Acorn from New York City. And we did it. I was good. It was really fun. Anyway, here's some more pictures of here. And now, in 1945, when I went to Austin and school there, these are from Austin. Hillel produced a show called Steppin' High, and I was the featured dancer, but also I helped with the choreography. Then after that, Time Staggers On, which was an annual event at University of Texas at Austin, called and asked me to choreograph the show that year. And so this is the article about me choreographing that show. Let's see what else we have. Oh, well, here's the wedding picture. And I've got a picture of my bridesmaids. But this is when Mark and I were married at Temple Emmanuel. And his parents were Lena and Mara Seltzer. And my parents, Ann and Nathan Levine. And one of the things that has been the most wonderful part of my growing up is the Rafkin family decided to form a group. Shall we answer that or let it go? Just let it ring. Anyway, we formed a group of our family called Family Incorporated, and Family Incorporated was part of my growing up years. And so here's a picture of Family Incorporated. We did crazy things. Our family was known for our crazy things. We gave parties, a lot of parties, and one of them we sent collect Western Union grams to people to invite them to the party. So if they didn't pay for the Western Union, they didn't get invited to the party. These are my 3 children. Mark and I lived in South Dallas on Peabody. We did get an apartment there. We lived there for 5 years, and our oldest daughter, Adrian, was born there. And then we moved to Brookhurst Drive because Francis and Julius Coleman, our very dear friends, said, you've got to come out and buy this, what were they? They were FHH. They were for people who were in the Army, men who were in the Army. So we bought 4 doors away from them, and our kids grew up together, etc., etc., etc. And all those years that the kids got their Jewish education, we had to carpool to go to Shereth Israel, which was then on Walnut Hill. And so a Jewish upbringing was very important to me. Being Jewish has always been very important to me. And so here's some more. A Family Incorporated. That's Robert at his bar mitzvah. Oh, Mark and I went on a cruise, and so they told us to bring a costume, which I did. That's the costume I brought. And guess what? I won the contest. It was a jitterbug contest, I think. And this was a gentleman on the boat. At one of Mother and Dad's parties. These men were on the boat, Italian boat. Cute, real cute. Do you remember who this is?
The face is very familiar.
Well, anyway, I think I have some other pictures further back. After we stayed in Brookhurst, we moved to Yamini Drive. We built a home, and our home was featured in the newspaper. This is part of it. And this is part of what I did. I worked very hard for Federation. I did a lot of volunteer work as I grew up. I started with Save a Life when we were first married, because my grandmother, my father's mother, Sonia Levine, volunteered for Save a Life. So I went into Save a Life, and so did all of my friends. And from Save a Life, I can name, I don't know, B'nai B'rith, Hadassah, just name a Jewish organization, and I helped. And most of the time what I did was shows for them to raise money. And so that was wonderful. But this is when I was chairman of the Women's Division, Federation Drive, because then the men's division had theirs and we had ours, which is different from the way they're doing it these days. So here I am with Hubert Humphreys. Do you recognize anybody else?
Yes, Jack Kravitz,
Who was
and
the-
Rabbi Ola and the Love Shore.
Uh-huh.
You want to tell them who Jack Kravitz was?
Well, he was the director of the Jewish Federation back then when I was growing up.
And that year,
Oh, here. What happened here?
67, November of 67. is
Okay,
what-
that was the year that I don't know. It's upside down, so I can't see it. Let's see, what is it?
Women's Division opens year with Barn Theater Party.
Okay.
And this is on the same page.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
of 67.
Okay. In 70, I worked with Arlene Liebs one year because she was chairman of the Federation Drive, and I was her assistant, associate, whatever you want to call it, and then they put me in. The interesting thing that I'd like to mention here is because Mark and I were not wealthy. He worked for a company, and but we lived very nicely. But most of the women during those times who were chairmen were very wealthy. And then they came to me and asked me, and I was flabbergasted because I didn't think I'd ever reach that, because that was a cornerstone for me to be able to do that work.
You mentioned Save a Life League. You want to talk about it a little bit, what their goals, what their mission was?
Save a Life is still very, very active in California. And we raised money for the hospital in Duarte, California.
Which concentrates on what type of illness?
Primarily on, I want to say, what is it? Come on, you know it.
Lung.
Yeah.
Pulmonary.
And very similar to the Jewish hospital in Denver, which I also, we did a big fundraiser for them. Anyway, here are some of the things. Here we are for the Purim Ball. I was chairman of the Purim Ball. I choreographed Purim Balls. Here's Arlene and I. And let's see, this was in the Times Herald in 1969. That's when she was chairman, I'm almost sure.
The Purim Ball is noted as 1963, February 21st,
Yeah, they started way back.
1963.
And the Purim Balls were huge because we held them at Fair Park in the biggest auditorium there. And every Jewish organization was represented. They sent a Purim Ball queen, okay? And there was so it was a big thing. Everybody was presented, and I choreographed. My middle name almost. Anyway, and one year I actually was a queen. So these are people who were always very active in the community. Don Safran, do you remember Don? He was a writer, a reporter for the Dallas Times Herald. And there's Pearl Klausner and Bess Cohn, and who else? That's
Arnold,
that's Ethel Silvergold. Anyway, here's is that Renee? Isn't that Renee Stanley?
yes.
Here I am over here. Anyway, so here are more pictures. What's this one? Ginger, what's this picture?
Women's Division Campaign Cabinet, July. Pictures are Mrs. Sal Levine, Mrs. Bernard Shannon, Fred Teicher, Henry Cohn, Carl Barron, Norman Shapiro, and Julian Lerner. That's the front row. And the back, left to right, are Madames Edwin Balaban, Mike Jacobs, Erwin Schwartz, Morris Cohen, Milton Rubin, Mr. Jack Kravitz, and Jerome Leeds.
I think I'm in that picture.
It's Mrs. Jerome Leeds, campaign chairman, Marcus Seltzer, and Gerald Ray. Mrs. Marcus Seltzer
Here I am,
and
right
Mrs.
here,
Gerald
right?
Ray. Mm-hmm.
Upside down?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, it's as I said. So here are some things that we did. Save a Life Luncheon. And this is the music medala. That was for Sheriff Israel. And Zai was wonderful. Zai was always the most beautiful voice. Terrific. And here's Zai and I and Don Safran. We also did a fundraiser for the Jewish Community Center that was at the hotel because we couldn't do it at the center because we had too many people who wanted to come to the show. And Zai and I produced that show. We had a 10-piece orchestra with Tom Merriman, who did all of the musical arrangements. Harold Kallenberg was in the show. Epstein was in the shows. You know, all of the names that you knew. And our shows were so successful and we raised a lot of money. Well, I've got some things over there I'd love to show you. Now, here's the dancing chorus. Dancing chorus. Are you cutting off now?
We're pausing.
Huh?
Ready?
So as I was saying, here is the chorus line. Excuse me, these gorgeous women with these gorgeous legs that I choreographed and directed through the shows for the center. And here's a newspaper article about Broadway melodies. So that was when we worked very hard for this kind of stuff. Let's see, this is brought back by popular demand, My Fair Lady.
Some Fair
Lady, excuse me. And of course, Iona had the lead in that, and Sonny Schwiff. And here's Broadway Melodies, a copy of that. Do you want to read this, please?
In grateful appreciation for dedicated leadership to Lenore Seltzer, President, Women's Division, Jewish Welfare Federation of Dallas.
Does it say a year?
It doesn't give the year, but the next one next to it, it says 1965.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute, 72, 73 is when that was.
Okay. And then we did South Pacific.
South of Pacific.
That was for B'nai B'rith. We did a number of shows for B'nai B'rith. And these are family pictures. But my precious grandchildren. Would you like to see my grandchildren? There's Rachel, and here's Mark. They're adorable and smart.
Okay, that's it. I gotta flip. Are you?
Okay.
Okay.
So Ginger wants me to talk about holidays right now. And the best I can tell you is that in my own home with my mother and dad, because my father traveled, I don't remember too many holidays. I remember being with my mother's mother, Oliver Shalom, as you like to say, Sarah Rafkin and Max Rafkin. I used to spend nights there, and they'd have their poker games there. It was wonderful. Those were my younger days. Once I married Mark and came into his family, that's when we really started celebrating Jewish holidays. And they lived on Wendelkin as well in a big 2-story home. And so it was okay when we had family there for holidays. But then they sold that home and moved to East Dallas. And their home was no larger than this living room and dining room, with 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a kitchen. Okay? So the most wonderful holiday was always Passover. And we celebrated Passover traditionally. Around the 2nd bedroom was turned into a dining room, and we sat around the dining room table. And as the kids came into the family, because we had Mark's sister Katie and her husband Joe, Sammy and his wife Clarice, and their 3 children, and Katie's 3 children, and my 3 children, that dining room didn't hold all of us. However, during the Passover service, the kids would all come in and they'd have to participate, especially the 4 questions. And the 4 questions, the stupid one, we always had a fight over who was going to read that. Anyway, afterwards, the food, my mother kept kosher. We used to go over to her home before the holiday to kosher everything. She used to bury her silverware into the ground to kosher that. And then we'd have to change all of the dishes. And we'd go over there to make gefilte fish for, by hand. Everything was, we didn't have someone who could grind fish for, it was, so that was just part of growing up with the Seltzers, and it was a wonderful tradition, always a wonderful tradition. And we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of course. And we would do that at their home as well. And we would always have, once we washed our hands and came into the house, we would have, she would have egg salad for us to Nashan. And let me think what else she would have. Matzah, of course. So, very traditional. And my kids grew up that way. The most fun they always had was drinking the kosher wine, Manischewitz. And let me tell you, they got drunk more than once. It was fun. It was a lot of fun. And when they think about their growing up days, they always talk about getting drunk at Grandma Lena's house.
You had begun to talk a little bit about your work with Arthur Murray. You wanna go back to that?
After I danced in the musicals for 2 years, I was in Austin, came back to audition for the 3rd year at the musicals, and Billy wouldn't let me. He was he was the bigwig. Billy would not let me even try out, audition. I said, I've been in it for 2 years. I don't need to audition. He said, you missed auditions. You may not dance. So that was a really heartbreaking experience. And one of the women that I met while I was dancing in the operettas had left, and she was teaching at Arthur Murray's and suggested that I come to Arthur Murray's. So I did. I went to Arthur Murray's and I became a teacher at Arthur Murray's. And the way to make money at Arthur Murray's was not to teach, it was to sell courses. Okay, so they wanted to promote me and let me sell courses. Well, I had never really done that before. However, when I was, how you remember things, I used to work when I was 16, for Mr. Blatt. Now, do you know who Mr. Blatt was? I'll tell you who he was. He was the manager of a big store downtown, and his daughter married a Rosansky gentleman, who is our city councilman, Mitchell. So Rita Rosansky, I used to work for her father.
What store did he have?
It wasn't Learner's, I can't remember which one, but it was similar to Learner's. Anyway, that was quite an experience, and he was really something else. He made you toe the line. So I did. Anyway, so where was I?
What did you do? What was your role working for Mr. Blatt?
Well, I was on the floor and I sold. But when Arthur Murray's asked me to sell, I really didn't want to. I felt uncomfortable, so what they did instead, they promoted me, and I used to train the teachers for Arthur Murray's. And when I made less money training the teachers than I did teaching, I asked for a raise, and I didn't get it, so guess what? I quit. So I worked there for about 3 years. And then Mark and I started our family, and so it was really lovely. What else?
What about holidays like Shavuot or Hanukkah? Did you celebrate Hanukkah? How did you
Oh yeah,
celebrate
we
Hanukkah?
used to have a good time for Hanukkah. When Mark's family would get together for Hanukkah, we used to exchange gifts. And then the family got very large, because Katie's family included her 3 sons, Ross, Stephen, and my favorite, he died of, he had diabetes. Anyway, we used to have Hanukkah parties, and the latkes, and I'd have it over at our home too. I didn't expect everybody to do their thing and me not do my thing. So yes, we did.
Do you want to mention?
Go on.
Do you want to mention the business that Katie and Joe were?
Oh, you bet. Katie and Joe originally were in downtown in the district that's now recognized as, what is it recognized as?
West End?
No, they're in the East End.
Deep Ellum?
Deep Ellum. That's where a lot of the Jews worked and had their own businesses. Goldstein had his pawn shop there. The Siegels had a dry goods store of sorts there. And gosh, I need to diverse. My father's family, there were 3 brothers, 2 sisters, 5 children. And all of them went into the dry goods business, except my father, who sold on the road. So my Uncle Julius had a store, a dry goods store on Ross and Hall. My Aunt Bee and her husband had a store on, shoot, I wish I could remember. Anyway, they had a dry goods store and eventually moved to Waxahachie and opened up a dry goods store there in the square. There was always one Jewish merchant in a square. I bet, Debbie, your family could relate to that, in Marshall, right? Anyway, then the other sister, Senate, what a lovely woman. Anyway, she and her family opened up a dry goods store in the square in Sulphur Springs. Now the two sisters ended up moving to California, and they had their stores in California. And I don't remember, I remember that they had, one of them had a store where all of the black, I don't know how to say this properly, the black people had moved into, and it became a very rough neighborhood. So they ended up closing their store there. My other aunt...
Is that in Dallas you're talking
No,
about?
I'm talking about in Los Angeles.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Los Angeles. The other aunt also had a store there, and her husband died before her, and so did Francis and Maury Sennett was one of the couples. B and Abe Binder was the other. Okay. And Dave Levine was the third brother. So it was Dave and I just mentioned his name. Anyway, he had the store on Ross, and my dad. So those were the three brothers and the two sisters. And why were they in dry goods and why were they in small towns? Because no one would hire them to work in any other business. They couldn't go to college. They couldn't they could graduate from high school, but they couldn't own a business. They couldn't work for someone or become a doctor, a lawyer, or a merchant. A merchant they could go. Doctor, lawyer, Indian chief.
And you want to explain why?
I'm getting ready to say they wouldn't hire Jews. They wouldn't let them come to work or have their own businesses. And that's why they all had their own businesses. Because that's the only way they could make money. They couldn't farm. They couldn't buy land. Does that make sense? Am I telling the story right, Ginger?
Well, yes, basically, yes.
And so all of the merchants who opened up in Dallas downtown, you think about all of the businesses that were down there, Lynn's Brothers, Neiman Marcus, E.M. Can, A. Harris, Dreyfus and Son, all Jewish, Teich Gettinger, all Jewish merchants, because they couldn't go to school to become a doctor, lawyer, and Indian chief. Anyway.
You started to talk about Kate and Joe Siegel.
Oh, Siegel, yeah, they had a dry goods store in Deep Ellum, along with his brother, Sam Siegel, who's the father of Jerry Siegel, who is well known, and his son, what's his son's name? He's the voice in, he's done movies, a lot of different movies. Anyway, so.
You want to tell where they are now?
I think they're in up east. Huh?
They were in Hollywood. They were in Woodland Hills.
Yeah, but now they're in the east. So
but their business after Deep Elm.
After they finished that business, because it became it became impossible to make a living there. They bought New York Bakery on Forest Avenue, and they owned New York Bakery for years. And my sister-in-law Katie, she tasted the bread every day, and if it didn't taste right, she'd make them go back and bake bread again. And I'd like to mention my brother-in-law Sammy, he did get a job with an insurance company, and then he ended up going to work for the Rosenfields, who had a scrap Liberty. Yeah, very similar to what Mike does or did. So they ended up in Jewish places. So next question.
Okay, how has, you mentioned that you became members of Sheriff Israel. Were you members of other shuls at the same time?
No,
And-
only Sheriff Israel.
Okay. How have you changed over the years? Has the shul changed over the years?
Well,
Talk
let
about
me
that a little bit.
explain. I was very active at Sheriff Israel also. I did a lot of fundraising, did shows for them, as I've shown you. Wherever my kids were, that's where I was. So I'll come back to that. But at Sheriff Israel, we participated, and we were good members there. After my first husband, Marcus Seltzer, was killed saving his secretary's life. So he died a hero, and his secretary ended up with a broken leg. And that was a shock for the entire community. It was on January 9th, 36 years ago.
Yeah. What business did he work for? You want to talk
He
about
worked for a worked in paper. And that's how, I don't want to go into that if I don't have,
Okay.
I'd rather not.
that? Okay.
So Mark died. I was widowed for 21 years, and I married Henry Cohn 14 years ago. And Henry was a member of Temple Shalom, so I want him. And I happened to be, at that time, and still am, very close friends with Rabbi Vida and Jordan Ossire. And he was in a very ugly mess at Sheriff Israel that I prefer not talking about. But I told Henry I wanted to stay a member of that until everything was settled with Jordan. And we did. We were members at both, at Sheriff Israel and at Temple Shalom, because Henry had left Temple Emmanuel. That's where his kids grew up. And the reason he left is because his oldest daughter married a non-Jew, or wanted to, and they wouldn't let them be married at Temple Emmanuel. So he joined Temple Shalom and became very active there.
It's interesting.
And while I was at Temple Shalom, of course, I choreographed and directed a show called Hats Off. It was for sisterhood. We raised a lot of money. It was a terrific show. It was fun, and they gave us a standing ovation at the end. I've got pictures. You guys need to see my pictures. Anyway, next question.
What are the Jewish organizations have you been a member of through the years? And do you want to talk about Camp Bonim a little bit?
I wrote it down. I had forgotten about Camp Bonim. My parents, who lived on Park Row again, and we were right across from the Hebrew school. And that used to be the home of Weisfeld, Rabbi Weisfeld, who was the rabbi at Sheriff Israel. This is going way back, Debbie. You wouldn't remember that. Anyway.
Do you want to talk about what?
Levine was in charge, Jacob Levine was in charge of the Hebrew school. After the Weisfelds moved out, it became a Hebrew school. And part of what Jacob Levine did was to start a summer camp for Jewish kids.
Mhm.
And so we went. My brother went and I went. It was called Camp Onim, and it was part of a very important part of my Jewish upbringing. And we had lots of fun there. I wish I could find, I didn't get to find all of my pictures.
Where is
but I
it?
have a picture of Jerome Eli, Bernard Levy, Zesmer,
David
David Zesmer. I think there were 4 of them.
Macy,
Macy. Yeah, and they were dressed up as women.
Macy Smith.
Macy Smith, right. They were dressed up as women. That was the cutest picture. If you ever want to see it, I'll try to find it. Anyway.
You want to tell where it was located?
Yeah, it was at Lake
Dallas.
Dallas. Thank you. Lake Dallas. And the women who cooked for us were Lorelei Weltman's mother and aunt. And
Frances actually did the cooking, but they did the meal planning. There was a gal she was a black lady. She was an African American lady.
Oh, okay. I didn't read.
Yeah. And there was an original Frances who had worked for Mrs. Zesmeralda,
okay.
who was also a cook at 41.
So those were important parts of my life growing up. And
there was a Habonim camp.
Camp Habonim. Yeah, that was. And we had a
Reunion.
Thank you, a reunion about 10 years ago, and it was fabulous. One of my good friends was a Gentile woman who lived a house away from us, Betty Jo Moore. And Betty Jo Moore grew up with all of us Jewish kids and ended up going to Camp Onim as well and came in for the reunion. And she was best friends with Lorelei Weltman, best friends. And lots of stories that I won't go into, but it was a fabulous time. And my brother went. Oh, I will tell you, at the reunion, they passed around newspapers that we used to print. And so on the front page of one of them, there was this headline, Levine strikes him out, or something like that. And so I didn't have on my contacts, so I couldn't read it. So I thought, oh, this is about Gerald, my brother. Zeus, y'all. Everybody called him Zeus. So when I got home, it was all about, I decided I wanted to read it. And guess what? It was all about me. I was the star player on our baseball team. That was such a shock. That was fun. Okay, keep asking.
Okay, the family structure over the years. You've talked about your homes and where you moved, and the structure as far as, did people, how many children were in your family, immediate family? Were you
Gerald
and Zeus?
and I.
Did your grandparents live with you at any time, or
Yes.
what was the
Yes, my
arrangement?
grandfather. Let me explain that when I was 12, my grandmother died because her mother lived with her. Her name was Annie Moskowitz, and her mother lived with her. And one night, my grandmother Sarah Ravkin and Max Ravkin went to a movie, and when they came home, they saw that their home was on fire. And they thought, my grandmother thought her mother was in the house. She had a heart attack and died. And thank God my great-grandmother was fine. She lived. So my grandfather was all alone. And we couldn't take in both of them, so my great-grandmother went to live in one of the Jewish homes, I'm sure. And Papa, Max Ravkin, and the youngest son of the family, who was not married, they moved in with us. And so that was on Park Road. So Duddy and I were very close because we grew up together. Oh, and I have to tell you, I'm digressing.
It's okay.
On the front porch, we had a front porch, And all the boys used to come over so that I could teach them how to dance. But let me tell you, so I taught Bernard Levy how to dance, Herb Schessel, that's who it was. Who else? I don't remember, but I taught a bunch of guys how to dance. Oh, Edwin Ornish. Taught Edwin. Yep, taught them all. But let me tell you that we had a maid who was a terrific jitterbug dancer. So she taught me how to jitterbug. And we would dance on the front porch and everybody would watch us. And my mother was a great dancer, but Abe Rafkin was terrific. He was the star of our Rafkin family dance. In fact, he and Edna, his wife, who owned Page Boy Maternity, which was the premier company in the country, not just in Dallas. And she and her two sisters owned Page Boy, and one of the sisters still lives in Dallas, and her name is Louise Gardner. Someone very recognizable. And Louise, and I used to call her Tootsie because that was the name I knew her by. Never knew her real name until years later. Anyway, Tootsie was the designer, very talented, beautiful woman. And it was only in recent years has she become so philanthropic. Oh, I got to talk about philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
The family name.
Frankfort. Edna Frankfort, Elsie Frankfort, and Tootsie Frankfort. And the Frankforts, lived in Oak Cliff, which is unusual. Very few Jews lived in Oak Cliff, and why they lived there I'll never know, but they did. Anyway, so that's David Frankfort's mother. Victor Frankfort was also part of the family, and he was married to Anne Barzoon. Would that be right? Anyway, he was married to a woman named Anne, and she was gorgeous. And so David Frankfort, who's also well known in the community, was part of that family. But Page Boy was their success story. That was before women really were in business for themselves. Mm-hmm. And they were, not only were they a leader in business, but they were ahead of their time in so many different ways. My Aunt Edna wanted the latest and best in the way of food and what you should be eating. She and Abe used to go to California to a ranch there, and they would grow their food there. And so Edna also was into yoga, and she brought in the top yoga teacher in the country into her factory. Listen to this. It's amazing. And she would have her people take a yoga break every day because they knew that by doing something like that away from the manufacturing end of it, they would be able to produce more. Now that is really unique.
Again, what factory was that now?
Page Boy.
Page Boy. Okay.
On the corner of Cedar Springs was that triangle, Cedar Springs. And I went to work for Edna, by the way. Yeah, because while I was working at, I got pregnant after I had finished working at Arthur Murray's. Abe and Edna were taking lessons from me then. So when I stopped teaching there and I was pregnant, she said, I tell you what, we'll take lessons from you and I'll pay you by giving you your wardrobe. Well, how could I refuse that? I was the best dressed pregnant woman in the city of Dallas.
What year was that?
Adrian was born in 49. So that was in 49. Kathy was born in 52 and Robert in 55. Okay?
Yeah. Do you want to describe the Jewish community through the years and how it's changed?
Well, I
Briefly.
think, oh my gosh, Pocahontas, Jewish Community Center, that's where it was. And so was Sheriff Israel. Sheriff Israel was there. Temple Emmanuel is always, in my memory, was always on South Boulevard. Sheriff Israel, I was not a member of, but we used to go there during the high holy days. It was like a fashion parade, and we'd always have to have new clothes for Rosh Hashanah so that we would look the prettiest and best that we possibly could. Is the time over?
No.
It
Not yet.
isn't?
You're
Yeah,
right.
she's through.
Yeah, we've got a minute.
Wait a minute.
Tale. Let me talk about myself and the businesses that I've started. The first one was Linkie the Linkie the Fitness Pro. I'd gone to Russia with the fashion group. And while I was there, I found out what they were doing there. They were exercising in the mornings, every morning, before they went to work or at work. So when I came home, I decided I'd go into the business of putting exercise into companies. And I found a particular company that allowed me to come in and do a
What year?
probably 1997, 96, 97.
Not 91.
No,
Okay.
91. Oh, you know what? You may be right.
No, it says 96 there. 76.
76.
90 what?
This one says 76. but
It
that's
should be
Linkie.
76
In Russia? You went to Russia that early?
in 75. In 76, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And that's a story. If you ever want a story, I got lots to tell you about that one. Because I contacted a lot of people here in Dallas who still had relatives in Russia. And so I did. But I had a great aunt who lived in Dallas there was still family in Odessa, and she would not give me their names or their addresses or how to contact them because she was afraid. And I can understand it, having been there and back. I can really understand why she didn't, but the other people did let me. And while I was at Russia, I became friends with a couple of women.
How did you decide to go to Russia?
I love travel, and the idea of going with people that I'm interested in. I was a member of Fashion Group for years, and when the opportunity came, I decided I'd go.
So the fashion group was the one that made a trip to Russia?
Yes, there were about 46 people of us from the United States and Mexico and Canada. This is a fascinating story. I took my father-in-law's Hebrew Bible with me on that trip and hid it so that they wouldn't confiscate it. On a Saturday morning, I was told to go into where the synagogue is in this capital. Moscow. And so I did with my friends, and we walked up and down the street. The synagogue was on one side, and the Jews were on one side, but there were also Jews on the other side, and in between were the Russian soldiers. It turns out that the reason that there were Jews on either side is because they were looking for mates for their children. The children wouldn't go, but the parents did, and they tried to make arrangements for their children to be married to other Jews, because that was very important to them even then. So, but I still had my father-in-law's Bible in Hebrew, and I wanted to be sure that I got it to someone who would really appreciate it, from the synagogue if possible. And it turns out that one of the men spoke very quietly and said, "Where are you staying?" And we told him the name of the hotel. He said, "I will meet you back there in an hour." So we went back to the hotel. He came into the hotel, and we went into the room, and he pointed to each corner as though to say, "We're being watched and we're being taped, so be cautious." So that happened, but he was a student at the synagogue. He was in the underground in Russia at that time, trying to still retain his Jewishness. So I gave him the Bible, and it made me feel so good because I knew it would be put to the proper use with the right people. So that was a very important part of my trip, because some of the others had stuff confiscated. Whatever it was, I don't know, because there were only 2 of us that were Jewish, and one was married to a Jew. The interesting part of that was this beautiful woman, she's from Minneapolis. I said, "You know anybody in Dallas?" And she said, "Yeah, I know one person." I said, "Who is it?" She says, "You gotta be kidding, you wouldn't know them." I said, "Come on, tell me who it is. I really would like to know if you know someone in Dallas, especially if they're Jewish." And she finally acquiesced, and she said, "Well, their name is Landy, Paul and Nettie Landy." So I said, "Well, Nettie and I play bridge together every week. We live a block away. Our daughters are best friends. What else would you like to know?" They were both in the same industry, and that's how they knew each other. So anyway, it was quite a coincidence. I love telling that story. So you never know where you're going to meet another Jew. So anyway, when I came back, I decided, with my background, I decided to go to Bonnie Pruden. Bonnie Pruden was a physical fitness expert, the #1 person who had started the physical health industry in the U.S. government under Eisenhower. He had appointed her, and she had her business in Cambridge, Mass. Mm-hmm. And so I went there for over a week and learned her things, came back home and decided to start my own exercise business, but for corporations, not just for anybody. So I finally found someone who would allow me to come in, because I knew it had to be from the top. If the top people didn't participate in my program, forget it, because no one else would. To make a long story short, it started out with a bang. The big shots were there. They exercised.
What company was this that you reached?
Sue-Ann Manufacturing, another Jewish company. Anyway, I love doing that.
What was the family name? Sue-Ann? Who owned it?
Yeah. Well,
the name of the family?
Lamberts. The Lamberts owned it. And Sue-Ann was one of the children, Sue Lambert, who now owns the catering company. But that's how it was named, after Sue, Murray's daughter. Oh, that's another story. Oh, well, let me pass.
Finish this one, then you'll tell that
Okay,
one.
Linkie. I started my company, Linkie the Fitness Pro, and let me see if I can bring this up. Here it is. Here's my brochure. And I had pictures of the company and the people who were exercising. And this was on the back of the thing. And here's my business card. And so here's an article about me and the company. And I was ready to go with this. This was way before anybody else had come on the scene.
About what year?
1974. What did I say this was?
Well, you went to Russia in 1976, or you had
So
that
let's
thing.
say 77. Way before anybody else had thought about doing this. And the reason I didn't continue is because, just like Arthur Murray, I was afraid to go out and sell. I was afraid to go out and sell this. Because I had SMU ready to tape me and to videotape me so that all I'd have to do is deliver the tape. I didn't have to be anywhere, anytime. Oh, I was so smart, and I was so dumb. Oh, I was dumb. Anyway, that was a wonderful experience. Then I went into the speaking industry, and I became a professional speaker, and I spoke. Well, I need to go back. I forgot to tell you. I taught for 7 years in the Dallas County Community College system. I taught how to love and be loved and communicating with confidence. So I did that for 7 years, and that kind of got me into my next business, which was Speaker Source International. And I joined the National Speakers Association, and I started booking celebrities, professional speakers, and entertainers. So here is Love and Business Makes Dollars and Cents while I was speaking.
May we back up a minute? You were at University of Texas. Now, what were you majoring in?
Nothing. Getting married.
Did you get your degree? Did you
No.
have background in speaking at all?
Well, because I was a leader wherever I went, I always had to speak.
Okay.
So that's my experience.
Okay.
And, yeah, that's my experience.
Okay.
Anyway, so for 4 years I spoke and I talked about love and business. And I got tired of that because I really wasn't good at marketing myself. So I decided to go to the other end of the business because I knew everybody, all the top people in the speaking industry. I always go to the top because I can always go to the bottom. If you start at the bottom, you can't always get to the top. So and my Aunt Edna, bless her soul, she taught me something that I'll never forget, talk about family. She said, Linkie, ask for whatever you want. All you can do is get a no, and you might even get a yes. So, anyway, here's some of the professionals I worked with. That's Catherine Cryer, Dick Vitale, the basketball guy. Awesome, baby, awesome. Mike Ditka from Chicago. God, he was sick the day he was here. Famous Amos, the guy who actually started the Famous Amos cookies. Polly Bergen. I brought Polly here for the very first time the National Council of Jewish Women paid to have a professional come in. And I actually started them. They wanted someone like that, and they let me work with them. I was blessed, believe me. And I got Polly Bergen, the woman who was supposed to speak, had to back out at the last minute. She was, oh golly, she was terrific. I wish she had been there. Polly was not prepared. You have to be prepared when you're a speaker. And she spoke off the cuff. You never speak off the cuff. Don't ever speak off the cuff. Anybody. Now, let's see, who's that?
Roger Staubach.
Yeah, I worked with Roger. Oh, this is a fun guy. His name is Herb Cohn. He's from Washington. And guess who his best friend is and who he grew up with? The guy with suspenders who does television every night. Come on. Debbie, I bet you know who I'm talking about.
Jay Leno.
No. He's
Johnny Carson.
No. He's an interviewer.
He's an interviewer. Oh, well, we'll come back to that if y'all can't think of it. But he tells the story of when they were in high school together about he and his buddy that is hilarious. I've got his book. Anyway, let's see. Here's John Connolly. Do you recognize who that is? John Connolly, I also worked with him. These are all people I've worked with through the years. And I don't know who this gentleman is. But here's John Connolly again.
As in Governor John
Yeah.
Conley?
Yeah, I booked him and I worked with him. Here's, okay, I was in India also. I spent almost 3 months in India while I was single.
Why?
Because I was invited.
How?
Well, I started meditating. It's called Vipassana, and I did it for 15 years, and I met some of the people from India who were teachers, and one couple who were in Dallas for a meditation retreat invited me to come to India. I said, please do not invite me because otherwise I'll come. And so I did.
About what year?
I can tell you exactly. My father died in December of '88, and I was going to go to India because I was scheduled. I had my tickets, and my dad had been sick for so long. And I had already made up my mind if he didn't die before I left, I was going to go anyway. But bless his heart, I was the only one with him when he died. And he was such a cute guy. You know, some people have a light in their eyes. They have a sparkle in their presence. And I think that's who I learned the joy of joie de vie, however you say it, from him. Because he was always in high spirits. He was always selling himself. And he was terrific. So I went to India. And I stayed with the family who invited me, and then I went to the center about 2 hours out of
New Delhi?
No, further south.
Bombay?
And stayed at the meditation center for quite a while. And then I was invited back to their home, and he took me. There's only one teacher in Vipassana. His name is S.N. Goenka, and everybody else does exactly what he teaches. So I went to Goenka's home, and then I was invited to go to visit one of the women I had met while I was meditating, who lived in the center part of the south of India, and I spent 2 weeks with her and her family. And she did the unthinkable. She divorced her husband after I left, which was absolutely unthinkable in India at that time.
This is 1989.
Good. Oh, I'm glad you've got that. Yes, I left the end of '88, spent New Year's Eve in Bombay with my friends, stayed a couple of days, and then got on the train to go to meditate at Itgapuri is the name of the city or the town where the meditation center is. And now we have one outside of Dallas, 45 minutes to an hour away, that's growing immensely. It's just incredible. But we opened that center 15, 17 years ago. I made drapes for it. I also used to sew. Anyway, it was, and I'll go back. I told Henry before I married him, my second husband, I said, I meditate. And when I do meditate, I go to, it's out of Dallas, maybe an hour, and it's 12 days. And if that's not okay with you, then let's forget this, because I wanted to meditate. And he said, okay. So I did. I used to meditate maybe for 3 or 4 years, and then I gave it up. But of all the things that helped me, especially after Marcus's death, that meditation helped me more than anything. And so for anybody who really wants to get solid there's Vipassana meditation. However, I've just joined a class at Temple Emmanuel called Musar, which is the spiritual part of Judaism, which I've never known about, that's been missing for me. You know, Judaism is hard, 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 hard. But there was never anything that I could relate to spiritually. And now this class, 13 weeks at Temple Emmanuel, I'll be doing that class. I went to my first one last week.
Can you describe it briefly?
Very briefly. The name of the gentleman who is promoting this is Alan Morissus. Morissis, and he wrote 2 books. One is Climbing Jacob's Ladder, and I've forgotten the name of the other one because I gave it to my son to read. But it's all about spiritualism and Judaism and how they join together, and how, like, we will be working on 6 different topics. The first topic is humility. And we have discussions, we're paired up with one another. It's going to be very interesting. And of all the people in the large congregation that we have, there were 25 people who signed up. But that's too big for a class, so there are 2 classes now. So that's another thing I'm doing, because after Henry died, I was not comfortable at Temple Shalom, so I resigned and I moved to Temple Emmanuel. I've made full circle, and I'm back where I belong. And I met with David Stern, Rabbi Stern, and he said, well, what do you want from us, Linkie? What would you like to get from Temple Emmanuel? And I had to stop and think because I wasn't sure. And then I said, I want education. And right after that, this gentleman came into Dallas, and so that's why I'm signed up for Musar.
Do you want to briefly talk about some of the other areas of your meditation and the spirituality?
Well, the basis of the meditation that I did for so many years is very simple. We want what we don't have, and we don't want what we have. Very simple. And so we learn how to be happy with those restrictions, knowing that that's the way we look at life primarily. And to be happy, that's the reason we're here, by the way, is to be happy. That's really what God wants us to do. And to be happy, we have to be satisfied. To be satisfied, it means to be satisfied with everything in your life, not just a part here or a part here or a part there. I've got great children, but I've got a wonderful husband, but I've got plenty of money, but those buts get in the way. And so it isn't easy, and it's been very difficult for me. And I have to stop and remind myself a lot. And another part of spiritualism, which I've gone into, there are 7 laws in the universe. And one of them is the law of attraction. And a book came out, and a movie has come out. It's called The Secret. And it's all about, if you think about what you really want and stay on that course, God is going to help you find what it is you want. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. However, if you're really dedicated to it and keep it in your thoughts of what it is you want, then eventually it will happen. And I bet either of you, both of you, could think about something that's come into your life that you really didn't pray about, that you didn't think about particularly outwardly, but somewhere in your brain there was this little nugget going, yeah, that's what I really want. Yeah, that's what I really want. And it's come true. Has that happened to you, Ginger?
To a degree.
Yeah. How about you, Deb? To a degree. Yeah, I'm telling you. So When I taught at 3 of the colleges, to love and be loved, the most important lesson that I could teach was that to love yourself is the most important lesson you can learn. And I've tried to explain it by saying, look, if I wanted to give you $100, and if I just said, hey, here's $100, but you don't have it, right? Then you don't have that $100. But if I said, here's $100, take it. So you have to own it to give it away. So my point is, you have to love yourself first before you can give love away, real love. And we've been taught so many things opposite of that, that if you love yourself, then you're conceited. And if you love yourself, you're not a good person. You should love others like yourself. Well, see, that's his 10 Commandments, but we don't take it like that. We take it entirely differently. So to love yourself first is the only way you can give away true love, in my opinion. So that's my lecture on love. And
You've had some national recognition. You want to tell us a little about that? Oh, go ahead, finish this then.
no, I think we've done that. National recognition, you bet. Probably in the early 80s, I was contacted by a company who wanted to put me in Who's Who in the Southwest. And so I was in Who's Who in the Southwest. Then I was contacted by another company, the same company. They have all different divisions. It's the Marquee Company, and it's the Who's Who of Who's Who. Then they contacted me to be in Who's Who in Women. So I was in that. And then they started contacting me to be in Who's Who in the World. And I have a couple of the books, and they keep, every time you're in one of their books, they want to sell you one. And so I bought a couple, but then I said, you know what, I've just downsized, and I don't have any room anymore, but I'll take something else instead. So that's, in fact, I have a letter from Who's Who for the next year that I haven't sent in, that I guess I should.
Do they talk about the criteria that they use when they select
no
you?
idea. Well, they want people who've done things, who've accomplished things, because the very best recognition I've ever received, personally, happened in 6 years ago. What's this? So about 2003 or 4, I received a letter, and I have it here, I could show it to you, and they started a new division, and it's called 1,000 Great Americans, and this was the first year it was going to be published, and they asked me to be in it. Can you imagine how you would feel if you were called or written and said, we would like for you to accept this honor? And I wrote back and said, I think you've got the wrong person. I really was, I was totally overwhelmed. And even though I didn't buy the book, I can show you the medal that I did buy that says, this is from England, this is from Cambridge, England, because this particular company is it's the International Biographical Society in Cambridge, England, that's published this. Okay? It's different from Who's Who that's published in the United States. So, I've got the medal right there. It's just wonderful. It's one of my proudest possessions.
Do you have other scrapbooks, pictures that you would share with us?
How many would you like?
As many.
What I'd like to do is to be able to go over.
You're off now. This is Ginger Jacobs. It is now February 2nd,
Yes.
and we are back with Linkie
Seltzer.
Seltzer. And at her home, And you were talking about your career over the years.
Well, what I'd like to start with, if I may,
Please.
is the work that I did with Jewish Federation.
Good.
Because even though I worked with all of the Jewish organizations through the years, which I've already mentioned, I've worked industriously with Federation. And I worked myself up, and I'd like to show you some of the wonderful things that I've been given through the years. This is Lenore Seltzer, co-chairman, Women's Division, 1969, Dallas Jewish, it doesn't say Dallas, it says Jewish Welfare Federation of Dallas. Then the next one, that's 60, here's 67, the Jewish Welfare Federation of Dallas, 1967, presented to me for outstanding leadership. You know what, Ginger, why don't you read this one? I love this one. This is one of my favorites.
Presented to Lenore Seltzer, campaign chairman, Women's Division, Jewish Welfare Federation, 1970 campaign.
Isn't that beautiful? My menorah, I love it.
Jewish Welfare Federation of Dallas 1968 campaign presents the Best Nathan Memorial Award to Lenore Seltzer, Campaigner of the Year, Women's Division.
This is just one of the very many articles that was written in the Federation News, and this announces my presidency of, not of the Women's Division for 1972 and 73. The Women's Division had a separate division apart from the fundraising, and this was rather different, and they asked me to take the presidency, which I did. And anyway, I was asked to take a second year, and I refused because that's the year my husband was killed. I have some other things that also recognizes some of my work, and I think I'd like to do that now. This is a beautiful bowl that I just received, and it says Linkie Cohn, Foundation of the Collier Center. I spent 6 years on the Collier board, and that has been one of the most gratifying things I've done in a long time. The best thing that I was able to accomplish was to put some of the children who have cochlear implants together with two men from the Turtle Creek Corral who taught them how to sing. And they appeared on a holiday show, the children, and they signed Silent Night. And there wasn't a dry eye. So I'll give you that.
Would you like to talk about the Collier Center for those?
The Collier Center is something exciting because Lena Collier left money for this to be done, and it's an audio, it's for hearing primarily, and they've expanded it because what's so wonderful is we are now Collier is part of the University of Texas at Dallas and also Southwestern University, and we are striving to become one of the leaders not in Dallas and not in this country, but in the world, to be recognized for the work. And in March, on March 6th and 7th, a weekend is being devoted to a gentleman from Australia who has won the very first, which will be an annual award from this point forward, the annual award of the Collier Communication Award. And they chose a gentleman from Australia who's done a tremendous amount of research for audio, and the cochlear implant program is absolutely incredible. It saves lives like you just can't understand. And I won't go into any further things because I could speak about that for hours. So that's one of my things. And now I'd like to talk about the Turtle Creek Corral. Here. I worked with the Turtle Creek Corral. If you'll hand me right over there. Yeah, all of that, including the book. Thank you. That's great. I'm not sure how I got together with the Turtle Creek Corral. Oh, I do know. Ethel Frankfort, who is Ethel Zale now, asked me to work with her on a fundraiser for Turtle Creek Corral. And we did a luncheon, and the performer at the luncheon was this gentleman who is also Jewish. His name is Michael Feinstein, and we had a lovely luncheon raising funds for the Turtle Creek Corral at the mansion. So this was a very exciting time for me. Then there were 3 couples who were asked to raise funds for the Denver Jewish Hospital, and that also, like Save a Life, is very much involved in breathing and life and works with kids. And the 3 couples were Ethel and David Frankfort at the time, and a lovely couple named Roger Myers and his wife Joyce. And the 3 of us did a fundraiser at the Adolphus Hotel, raised lots of money, and presented a beautiful program. It was black tie, and I'll never forget that one of the people who attended said, you know, I go to Washington, D.C. for the big event there every year, and this tops anything I've seen in Washington. So that was wonderful, because
About what year?
we had, what year? About 6 or 7 years ago, and I had the Turtle Creek Corral on as we opened the. Let me start from the beginning, because the Adolphus Hotel was where this event happened, and there's an area for the reception, and then you open the doors for the dinner where the tables are. Well, when we opened the doors for the dinner, 100 men in black tie were standing surrounding the room, and after everyone was seated, they sang 3 songs, and one of them was We Shall Overcome, because they have lost, the Turtle Creek Corral is made up primarily, but not exclusively, to men who are gay, and they have lost hundreds of men to AIDS. In fact, this coming Saturday, they're having a memorial for one of the men who's just died last week. So I was invited to work with the Corral on one of their programs. Let's see if I have anything. Oh, here's something that is interesting, because Tim Seelig, Dr. Tim Seelig, was the director of the Turtle Creek Corral for 20 years. He's since been replaced by his name is Jonathan Pallant, who happens to be Jewish. And when he was interviewed and he had to try out, Jonathan asked Tim Seelig if it mattered that he was Jewish, and Tim replied, well, if they can have a director like me who's Baptist and gay, I mean, come on. So Tim has a wonderful sense of humor. Anyway, they started a Bridge Builder Award, and they have 4 awards. They have the individual award, the corporate award, the organization award, and then special awards. And the first people who were awarded the individual awards was our mayor, who's now going to be with Obama in Washington. It was Ron and Matrice Kirk. And the second year, I was asked to accept the award. I always feel uncomfortable doing things like that, and I refused, and they said, It's by unanimous decision, and you must do it. So I did it, and I love doing it. And this is the book. Here's the Turtle Creek Corral with Tim. Can you get it, Debbie? And here's I'm going to turn it over so that you can see the expanse. Now, I'm not through talking about the Turtle Creek Corral because I have a story to tell you about Tim Seelig. The Turtle Creek Corral always advertised their Christmas program as the Christmas program. And once I got to know Tim, I said, Tim, you need to rethink this. If you keep calling it and advertising it the Christmas program, you've left out a lot of people. I said, why don't you consider calling it the holiday program? Done like that, the holiday program. And that's where the Collier kids sang, was the holiday program. There's an article here somewhere. I don't know where it is. Let's see if that's it. No, that's not it. This is for later. Remind. Oh, here it is. This was in the Texas Jewish Post, and you want to read it? It's really interesting.
You can read it.
Okay. Turtle Creek Corral to feature Star of David. I don't know how many people know that a song has been written about the Star of David, because after doing quite a bit of research, I couldn't find any song about the Star of David. And we have lots of other songs. So let me quickly say, we'd like to share a note we received from Dr. Tim Seelig, Artistic Director of the Turtle Creek Corral. He writes, this holiday season, oh, and that was another thing, they never had anything Jewish on their program. And so I invited Don Kroll to come and meet with Tim, and Don did his shtick, which he's famous for. So he was invited for a couple of years to do that. Then when I suggested that we do something in a song or something for the Star of David, have I shown you this? Oh, this is the Bridge Builder Award. That's what I was given. And I have this picture here because this was the night of the award, and I was surrounded by the Turtle Creek Corral hierarchy. But this is the award that they gave me because I had worked with them. And I actually choreographed one of their shows, part of one of their shows. And I had an article, I had a letter from Tim praising me about how wonderful I had worked with the boys. Okay, you can put that away.
The year is 2002 on this.
Oh, thank you, 2002. Thank you. Anyway, he said this holiday season is going to be unique and very exciting for the Corral and the 10,000 people who will hear it, because this was presented at the Mort Meyerson Symphony Hall, which is where the Corral always performs, and they usually have 3 to 5 performances. So it's the combination of those performances and why he could say 10,000 people will hear it. So 10,000 people who will hear the reason, the Star of David. Over a year ago, in looking for a piece about the Star of David, I approached my friends Linkie, Seltzer Cohn, and Cantor Don Kroll of Temple Shalom. We all came up empty-handed. Later that year, Linkie and Don began discussing about this request and took the lead. So what I did was I did the research and wrote the words that gave the history of the Star of David. Then I recommended that we call Aaron Kaplan to do the music. And Aaron and I collaborated on this project called The Star of David, and it was performed 5 times at the music hall and was quite well received. Unfortunately, it's like it's bit the dust, and I'd sure like for somebody to come along and bring it out of the doldrums and present it again, because I would be bragging if I said it really is important, because it gives the history. And so I will brag, because I worked hard on it. And so did Aaron. He worked extremely hard. And the music is so gorgeous. You might want to get that tape and put it into the Historical Society. So anyway, that's part of that. Then this is Tim wanted to have a coffee book, and so this is it. It's called Breathe, and it tells this history, and I'm listed here as one of the recipients of the Turtle Creek Corral Individual Award. And working with the Corral has been so rewarding and so exciting. And I was asked to be on the board this year, but I just couldn't. I've got too many other things. Now this is something also that just happened in, let's see what year it was. I think it was 2001. Chicago had started this. Chicago, Illinois had started a project for their city, and they did replicas of pigs.
Pegasus.
Huh?
Pegasus?
Pigs in Chicago.
Pigs. Okay.
And then Houston picked it up, and they did the same thing, same sort of thing with whatever they used. But Dallas then came along, and Dolores Barzoon, a very large, contributed to our Jewish community as well as the community at large, was chairman of what was called Dallas Soars. And what we did was to replicate the Pegasus, the red flying horse, because only if you were in Dallas and lived in Dallas did you remember that the tallest building in Dallas had a flying red horse on top of it that revolved. And so the horse was the signature item for Dallas Soars. They had, they combined artists, let's see, it's right here. They combined artists and businesses and community groups and schools to create all of these horses. And Henry and I were very fortunate. We were asked to be photographed to be included on one of the horses. And this is the horse that we were on. And the artist was Sean Northcutt, who's an exceptional artist and photographer. And our horse was shown downtown, close to the Kennedy Center. And there's still a horse. Do you see it? It's on this side. There's the article about the Turtle Creek Corral, and here, you look for it. It talks about my choreography. Tell me when you're through, Debbie. Okay? So, but this book is full of all of the horses. You can see them. And they chose very special artists to do these. In fact, the horse is still on display in Preston Royal on the northeast corner. So if you want to see one, that's the leavings of it. Excuse me. This is a music review of the show that I worked with the Corral, and it mentions that I worked It was choreographed by Los Angeles choreographer Mark Chung and Dallas Linkie Cohn. I had a good time working with them. And since then, they have become dancers as well as singers. And if you ever want to have fun and an evening of entertainment, plus hearing the most gorgeous music, go see the Turtle Creek Corral. I would say that 95% of the members are non-gay. Okay?
At one point, you had mentioned that you had produced a television show.
Oh, yes, I did. While I was working at Federation, I went to Mike Shapiro, who was the station manager at that time.
Of which channel?
To Channel 8, WFAA at that time. And he had a show called Speak to the Manager, and he was very open to me to let me come in and talk to him about doing a Jewish content show. And so I produced a television show, 30 minutes for almost a year, with the help of my darling friend Ziona Balaban. I always have to give her credit because she is so inventive and innovative. And together we make a good team. And so the show was well received, and it's never been done since. And that's another area that the Jewish community could go into and go back to WFAA and Mike Shapiro, bring up Mike Shapiro's name and see if you couldn't get, especially with the Mondells now, that kind of thing would be fabulous for the Jewish community to get on television. Of course, we've got Rabbi Offsire, who's on television every week. He's been doing a program with the rabbi. He's the only Jewish representative, but there are Baptists, all religions, 5 religions, but no Hamas, no Muslims. They may have added Muslim by now, but he gives the Jewish point of view to whatever project or subject they're talking about and discussing. And he's very well received and very, very well respected. So that's very important to know about.
Where is he, and what was your time? You're at Channel 8, and then Rabbi Offsire today.
Well, Jordan was, and Rabbi Offsire wasn't in Dallas at that time. I'm going way back in the 70s, because that's when I was chairman of the Federation Drive, and then the Women's Division, and so it was then. I would imagine that they might have something in their archives that you could go back and check. So that might be it was called Covenant, 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 and that was the name of the show.
Now with Rabbi Offsire, where is he broadcasting from today?
He broadcasts in Dallas. He lives in L.A. I take that back. He lives in Mission Hills now, California. But so he flies into Dallas. I think they tape 4 shows at a time, so it's a month's show. And he is the only rabbi, I'd like to say, that has received tenure from Sheriff Israel. First one in all of those 100 years, never gave tenure to anyone. And what else is lovely about Rabbi Offsire is that one of his parishioners, Jewish parishioners, when he had his synagogue in Palm Springs, asked him to come up to Canada to his synagogue to see if they wouldn't hire him for an interim rabbinate there. And he was hired, and he was supposed to have completed his term last year, and now they've asked him to stay on another year while they're interviewing someone that they think will become their permanent rabbi. But they love him so that they want him to stay on for another year anyway.
Let's talk about intermarriage. Is there intermarriage in your family, and what generations?
Oh, I want to show you this picture before we go too far. Because this is a better picture of the horse and Henry and me, and I'm pointing to where we are on the horse. And in the picture in the magazine, the book, Breathe, we happened to be in that picture. Of course, you can't see us, but it's good that I had on a red shirt because you could see the red shirt.
Yeah.
So this was an evening of philanthropy, and that was, is that a good picture? Good. Let me talk about my family, the Rafkin family. This is Family Incorporated, which I've told you about already. But here's our hierarchy. Family owned since 1947, and we had a big blowout in 1997, which was 11 years ago. And everybody from all over the world came because we had, some of the family lived in California, some in New York, some in Florida, and we even had one who came from Bosnia. I'm telling you, it's amazing. So the oldest, even though it's not in that order, my mother was the oldest of the 5 children, Anne Levine. And she was married to Nathan Levine, which I've already mentioned, and 2 children, me, Linkie Levine, and my brother Gerald Zeus Levine. My brother, I only married 2 Jewish men. My brother has been married numerous times and always to a Gentile woman. Even with his Jewish upbringing, he married only Gentile women. He's married to a nice lady now. Then there's Abe and Edna Rafkin, and Billy and Lisi. Billy was the son. Brett and Ellen were their children, and Brett recently passed away, unfortunately. Joan was married to Ari Sussman, so there was Jewish. Ellen, by the way, was not Jewish. Brett was a doctor, and he married a non-Jewish woman. Joan and Ari had 3 children, have 3 children, Gavin, Daryl, and Jordan. Gavin lives in Bosnia. I think that's where he is now. And living with a lovely woman who is not Jewish. Daryl is recently married a couple of years ago to another lovely young woman who is not Jewish. And Jordan is the only one who married a Jewish woman and lives in California, Los Angeles. Nell and Lou Rafkin. My Uncle Lou was killed many years ago. He was shot and killed in South Dallas. And I think that Ginger is going to follow up on that story because it would be a good story to have. And Nell Rafkin just celebrated her 99th birthday on Christmas Day, and she promises she's going to be around for her 100th. And I believe her. Anyways, they had 2 children, Barbara Friedman. She married a beautiful man, Will Friedman. They had 2 children, Louis Paul and Morty. Morty married a Jewish woman named Ruthie, and they had 2 children, Leslie and Lou. Leslie married a Jewish boy first, and then since has married non-Jews. Lou is not married, but is not married any longer, and I think he married a non-Jew. The 2 children, the other children, Louis and Lorraine, children of Barbara and Will's. Lorraine married a Jewish boy, a very fine, from a lovely family, and they had 2 boys that are adorable, and they are going to be raised Jewish. Louis Paul married a non-Jew, and they have 2 children. And I'm not sure how those children will be raised because she, a lovely lady, just beautiful. I don't know how she'll raise those children because I think she's dedicated to her religion. Then there's Mutt and Lil Weil. Mutt was a Weil, part of the Weil family, and Lil was a Rafkin, so there was a lot of that going on. They had 3 children, Judy, Stanley, and Shelby. All 3 children married Jewish partners. Sherry married twice, and both times I think they were Jewish. Mike and Scott were the other 2 children, and Mike married out of the religion, and Scott married out of the religion. And they have children, and I know that Mike's children will not be raised Jewish, and I doubt that Scott's children will be. Stanley and Janice have 2 children, Greg and Wendy. Greg's not been married, and Wendy has been married, and she's married out of the religion also. Shelby and Karen have 2 children, Allison and Adam, and they both married Jewish people. Duddy and Shirley, this is where everybody in the family married out of the religion. Amazing. But they married fabulous people.
Oh my God, I didn't know you were related to all of them.
You know them all, don't you?
I know. You know, I never did know any of them until my brother got involved with Leslie.
Oh, okay.
But except for Barbara Frieden, she was my teacher at Kramer. She taught us at Kramer. She was the.
I just told Linkie she had taught Mark at Kramer.
Yeah, Barbara taught us all.
Taught there.
Oh my gosh, she played the piano, and her sons. She was my teacher forever.
That's off. All right, we're going to start now.
A new tape?
I've turned this one. I've got a half an hour left.
Well, I'm done. This just popped off. I need a new tape.
Oh, was that the end?
Yes, I was telling you, 3 minutes.
Well, you're basically almost finished. Well, let's go with it. All right, let's do the tape. Huh?
You haven't gotten my books.
You haven't gotten that. All right, come on, we got time. Go ahead.
Okay,
Let's get another tape and mark that one, please.
I'm so sorry that I'm so...
You're doing great. You're doing great.
Is this good?
Oh, this is good. This is great.
I mean, the family incorporated and how we...
That's
more
an amazing
Christians than
thing.
Jews in the
But you
family.
see what happens to American Jewish community.
Right.
And this is one of the threats as far as Jews in America is concerned, unless we think in terms of prioritizing.
Right.
And that's what the day schools are about, and that's what all of these other Jewish institutes. Oh, that's great.
Okay.
But what I want to ask you is when the Rafkin family came to Dallas, the patriarch.
So
You have some idea.
Barbara and Judy are your first cousins?
Yeah,
Oh my God! Well, yeah, my mother and Judy are like best friends. They were.
they have been since they were little.
Right. So, okay. Why isn't this
What do
coming
you
out?
want me to start with?
Oh, no, finish
Family
what, we got time,
Incorporated.
we got time for you to finish that, and then we can talk about when, ready?
I want to continue with Family Incorporated because our family was so tight-knit, and we still meet, by the way. We meet 4 times a year. In fact, we just had, we meet on Christmas Day because that's when everybody can get together. But we meet on Thanksgiving, we break fast together, and we celebrate Mother's Day together. The other thing that we used to do, we went to Mineral Wells on vacation together every summer for years and years and years. I don't think you can tell this, but there's a picture of us in Mineral Wells. Also, we rented a bus, and the family went to Las Vegas together on the bus. And my mother was always the one who got fussed at the most because she took an hour to get her face fixed before she went to sleep every night. And guess what? When she died at 90, her face was beautiful. So they could make fun of her all they wanted, but she had gorgeous skin. So now, Here's a small picture of a family tree, but as I've told Ginger, Sidney Rafkin's daughter is married to a gentleman named Morris, and I've forgotten his last name, that's how much I know. He's done an extensive family tree for the Rafkin family, and it takes in the Levines as well because of the relationship between the two of them. And you're going to call and get the tape because he's done it on tape. Okay, well, there were always newspaper articles that were in the paper. This is fun because when I was growing up as a teenager, the boys used to have a group called DSD, and we're not sure what that meant, but and this is a picture of one of the parties, and this is a wonderful party because everybody in here is Jewish.
Where was that taken?
This was taken at, I think it was at White Rock at one of the places there. This is a picture of my sorority when I was in Texas University. I was a member of D Phi E, Delta Phi Epsilon, and there are a lot of Jewish girls. This was a Jewish sorority, not like today where they're intermingled. And so there are Jews and non-Jews in these. And I think D Phi E is a non-Jewish as well as Jewish sorority now. At University of Texas, there were 3 Jewish sororities. Did Jackie talk about that?
No. Well, she talked a little bit, but not.
Well, it's not, all I'm saying, there were 3 for the girls and 3 for the boys. Sammy's and Taudelt and I've forgotten the other one. A Pi. Then for the women, there was Sigma Delta Tau, Delta Phi Epsilon, and the other one. I just had it on my AE5, thank you. While I was at SMU, by the way, there was a Jewish sorority called Delta Rho. And Selma Kirshner was one of the members, along with whoever else was Jewish, was probably a member there too. So that was some of what happened. Now, what else did you want me to talk about?
The earliest group or members of the families when they came to Dallas.
I think that my family, Papa and
The Rafkins.
The Rafkins, 12. I was 12 when she died. So that's 71 years ago. How many years is 71 from today? So they were in Dallas already entrenched. And I would say the families came in the late 1919s and then possibly in the 20s, because I was born in Dallas and the family lived on Browder Street. And I could mention Aaron Spelling here because his family lived on Browder Street, and his mother and Mark's mother were sisters, so they were first cousins. And I could tell you lots of stories about going to California and staying with Aaron Spelling and his wife Candy, but also I could tell you about Carolyn Jones, and when he was married to Carolyn Jones. And so Candy is Jewish, and they have 2 children that you know about, and I don't, Tori. In fact, I was in California. This is another thing that happened to me that I forgot about. After my husband died, I got a call from Leo Fields of Zales Jewelry Company, and we were next door neighbors, and I had just finished working for Federation, and Leo called and said, would you be interested in going to New York to be interviewed for a job here in Dallas for American Friends of Hebrew University. Excuse me. So I did go. And I sat for 3 days watching all of the various cities and their executive directors go through the reports that they had to give and being brought up. And after the 3 days, the top guy in New York asked me to go to work for them in Dallas. And I've got pictures of that too, because Leo and Barbara had a reception for me when the head of Hebrew University came to Dallas for my induction, and I've got pictures of those somewhere. Anyway, the reason that came to mind is because I was in California, in Los Angeles. They had sent me to Washington, and I had met two senators who are in the Senate now, were very active with American Hebrew University. Oh, I wish I could remember their names. You know them if I mention them because they're very prominent. Anyway, I was sent to California, Los Angeles, to see how she ran her office, and Candy had just had Victoria, her first child, and because I had Marcus and I had always been invited to be their house guests. And that happened for 3 years in a row. And this was after Mark had died. I went over. Oh, after Mark died, they invited me to come and be their house guest, because Mark and I were supposed to have gone to California to be with them in December, and Aaron asked us to come in January instead, because that's when he'd be through with his pilots and selling his TV shows. Is this interesting?
Mm-hmm.
So Mark was killed on January 9th, and we had a new rabbi at Cherith Israel who didn't know Mark, and I asked Aaron to write his not obituary, his obituary, I guess, for the funeral.
Eulogy.
His eulogy, thank you, which Aaron did. And we were friends with the pastor at the Presbyterian Church on Walnut and Preston, and we went there one night, and the pastor read Aaron's eulogy of Mark at that time too. So this was in June of 1973 that I was in Los Angeles, and so I called a cab. I called first to see if Candy was there, and she wasn't. So I just took a cab and went over to the house because I knew where it was. We'd stayed there for 3 years, and they let me in because they knew me, and I went up and I got to see the baby, the infant. And so that was wonderful. Just the help was there. I found out afterwards that Candy was terribly upset that the help had let me in. So anyway, that I could tell you story after story about being with them and all the movie stars that we met and all the parties we went to, spending an evening with Sammy Davis Jr., going to his home. And I did a pillow for Sammy Davis because, let me think what it said. I've forgotten what I did. I did a petty point for him for his new home with Altavis. That's who he was married to there. Anyway, wonderful memories there. And now I need to get back on track.
Well, I want to go back 1 minute. You had mentioned you had been photographed with one of the interviewers. Was that perhaps Larry King?
Was that photograph?
Or had been with him, the interviewer that wears suspenders?
Yeah, well, he came to Dallas. The center invited him, I think it was.
Okay.
Or the Federation, and he was a speaker here. And
Okay.
so because I knew Cohen, his best friend, I went up to him and talked to him and told him the story that I knew about the two of them and they were always doing something that was incredibly terrible at school, and they almost got thrown out for this one, and I won't go into
No,
it.
which Cohen was it?
Herb Cohen,
Cohen, okay.
in Washington, D.C., who was a professional speaker who I'd booked when I had my company. I had Speaker Source International for 10 years, by the way. And I have a new company called Linkie. What is the name of my new company? Linkie, I don't know. Anyway, I have a new company.
What does it do?
Well, I will be doing the work for the Big Brothers Big Sisters under that banner, and I've currently worked for two companies. One is called Neuro Wellness, and that particular company is foremost in the country in working with amino acids and other things that most other health people do not work with, but we were just named the best company in the country who work with the neurotransmitters and the others. So,
Yeah.
go on.
I want to go back to the Jewish manufacturers, clothing manufacturers,
sure.
which you kind of
Well,
talked about.
I can tell you that the manufacturers, the primary ones in Dallas, were always Jewish. The Golds owned Nardis, Murray Munbus owned Sunny South, L.J. LeSueur, Jackie's father, I'm sure she spoke about her father and his business. There's a gentleman who was in the fabric business. Oh, I'll tell you who else. Harold Kuhn was in the business. He sold fabrics, and so did, what is his name? Anyway, there was another gentleman who was Jewish who also sold fabrics, and that was a very big part of the industry here in Dallas. And the other, Harry Moorchower. The Moorchowers owned, what was the name of their company? They had wholesale bags and accessories, and very successful. And my father and mother had Michael Modes, and that company was the one who helped little companies in these small towns get clothing for their businesses in the squares, because they couldn't afford to go to New York and buy a lot of different merchandise from a lot of manufacturers. And also in New York, a lot of the manufacturers in New York were Jewish as well. I worked for a gentleman who had a showroom in the apparel mart, and I worked for him for many years, and most of the people he represented were Jewish, and he was very successful. So when you talk about the industry relating to relating to clothing and or accessories, I promise you it was all Jewish related. You want to turn it off?
You want to take that?
I'm so sorry.
It's gone.
Okay, this is the Philanthropy Incorporated. This is a magazine that started a number of years ago, and because we were friends with the Dealys, who are the part of the Dealey family of the Dallas Morning News, they recommended that we be featured in one of the magazines, and so we were. Here we are. And it's a story about Henry and his years of philanthropy, Jewish philanthropy, and me and my story about philanthropy relating to Jewish causes. I just remembered I was on the Greater Dallas Human Relations Commission. I forgot about that. And I worked with that commission for over 3 years, and I helped integrate schools during the integration time. I worked with the Greater Dallas Community Relations Commission, and we went into Franklin, Hillcrest, White, and North Dallas High. North Dallas High was the first high school that we went into because it was the most integrated. It had blacks and whites. Okay. And Ginger wanted me to talk about what happened in South Dallas, how things changed. Well, my Uncle Lou sold real estate, and he sold it primarily to black people who wanted to move in, and that's why the whites, or the Jewish people at least, moved out of South Dallas into North Dallas. Can you get me some water?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Anyway, being part of this has been another part of my history that makes me very proud of being Jewish, because there weren't that many Jews featured, and there have been since. So that's very important. Now I'd like to talk about, I became a writer, and I co-authored a book with a gentleman who was a football player, and the name of the book, yeah, would you hand me all of that? Thank you very much. The name of the book, I showed you that picture. You don't need that. The name of the book was Winners for Life, and it came out on the market. It took me 3 years to write the book. Donnie Anderson was a Green Bay Packers star, and I used some of his information. Excuse me. Thank you. So we co-authored a book, and this is the book. It's called Winners for Life. And on the back, there are people who are very successful who commented on the validity of the book, including Bert Tansky, who was then chairman and CEO of Neiman Marcus, Wally Amos, the Cookie King, Lee Trevino, the professional golfer, Og Mandino, who at that time was the best-selling author of how-to books, and Polly Bergen, whom I had worked with. And inside the book, it came out in 1996 on January the 2nd, because the first people we sold it to, with Henry's help, was with Ursuline Academy. They bought 207 books to use, and it was tremendously successful. And I could go on and on about that. The book was then, I had the book done in Spanish, because, and I'm talking about in the 1990s, because I knew where it was going. And so I hired someone who did the translation, and Triumphadoras, De Para Vida, etc., the same book, only instead of the American heroes that I used in this book, I used Spanish and Chicano heroes, like a Lee Trevino and like whatever. Then Neiman Marcus came along. I went to Neiman's and I said, this is a book that you might want to carry. And guess what? They did. They bought it. And they wanted it in hardback. So this is one of the books that Neiman's did. And Bert Tansky had these glorious ideas of doing the book with gilt edges. So I had to go out and find someone who would do it, and once I did, guess what? I brought the prices back to Bert, and he says, I guess we'll just do it the way it is. It was outlandish. The other thing that I did that I'm very proud of is I worked with the Mavericks. They have a foundation, and I became friends with the woman who was in charge of the foundation, and she invited me to be part of their 3 years program with 5 schools, all in desperate situations with kids at risk. And so I wrote with 2 PhDs, Joanne Kratz and Michael Garza, EDD, guides for parents and teachers so that they would have a way of going through the book and using it to the best of their ability. Here's a picture of me with 2 very famous men. Winners for Life. We had a foundation and we raised money to give books away.
You want to say who the men were?
Oh, the 2 men. Let's see. Roger Staubach was one, and the other was Troy Aikman. Good picture, isn't it? Now let me tell you about, this is, at the schools, they decided to do a contest, and in each school, the children were asked to write an essay about Winners for Life and how it had impacted them. So the winners were selected, and they were invited to games for 3 years, new people invited to the Maverick games for dinner and the game, and then afterwards we took them downstairs to meet a Maverick player. And this is a picture of some of the children, and I don't know if you can capture the Maverick player who came down to talk to them to explain how important it was for them to read the book Winners for Life, and even more important, to set goals and work toward those goals, which is what I'm doing now with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And the reason I want to go talk about Big Brothers Big Sisters is because I wanted an empirical study done about the book and how it had impacted children. And I found 3 professors, 2 from Dallas and 1 from Ohio, who conducted it. It took over a year for them to do this study, and the study turned out magnificent. And after that study was done, the 3 professors were very excited about the results because they didn't expect the results to be so good. And they proposed an article for their professional journal, which you know is very difficult to get into and be published. However, this past June, my 3 professors were featured in this professional journal called Journal of Clinical Sports Psychology, and in this issue, Depression and Physical Activity, Measurement of Socially Desirable Responding, Hypnosis in Soccer, and the last one, Winners for Life and At-Risk Adolescents. And there's a 12-page article about their research and how wonderful it was. If you would hand me that over there, please. I think we're going to wind up very quickly. In 2001, I think that's the year, I received a letter from the International Biographical Center in Cambridge, England. And this was dated the 2nd of November 2001. And it says 1,000 Great Americans, and it says if there's one group of words that is known in whatever language by every person in this planet. It is the United States of America. And it goes on to talk about how important the United States is to the world. And after 35 years of continuous publications, they have decided to publish something called 1,000 Great Americans. And this was the first year that they had published it. And they were inviting me to be one of the 1,000. What can I say? I really felt that it shouldn't have been me because there were so many other people who were far more qualified than me, but for whatever reason they did choose me, and this is part of what they talked about. And so I couldn't buy another book, as I told you, but here is the medal that I have from that. And the medal can turn around this way, and it has my name on it and the inscription of 1001 Great Americans, 2001. And they've since continued publishing and selecting 1,000 Great Americans every year.
What was this year? What year?
2001. Anyway, these other medallions were given to us by Philanthropy Incorporated, one for me and one for Henry, so I thought that made a nice showing. Now, I think I haven't talked about my grandchildren enough. I want to show you a picture of my grandchildren they're much older now, but that's Rachel and that's Mark. And these are Adrian's children and me, and I love them dearly. Mark just graduated from University of North Carolina, 5 years with a double major, a magna or summa,
Cum laude.
whichever. And Rachel, I think I mentioned this,
No.
Boston, from University of Northeastern University. She graduated also with a magnum or whatever. And she is now living in Paris. She went to Aix-en-Provence for 2 years to learn the French language. So she is now teaching French people how to speak English. And she started in Aix-en-Provence teaching, and then she has recently moved to Paris, and she's teaching there for the company that she wanted to work with. This is a beautiful picture of my family. My daughter, my son, my 2 daughters, and my son. I love this picture. This was at Mother and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary. And I think it's so pretty. And this is some more of what I volunteered for. I directed and choreographed a show for Temple Shalom. It was called Hats Off. And these are the women who were in the show, and also the kids down here. These are the kids who were also in the show. And it received a standing ovation, and it was really quite well received. Here are pictures of Henry and I with 2 leaders in the Jewish community, Howard Rachowski and his wife Cindy. Howard had a beautiful reception for Henry regarding Lyft, because Henry was very involved with Lyft. So this happened at Howard and Cindy's home.
What is Lyft?
Lyft is literacy in Texas for people who don't know how to speak English. They are teaching kids how to speak English. This is also something that we were photographed in the paper for, the Humanitarian of the Year award that Henry is known for. And that year, Dr. Gerald Turner, who was the SMU president, received the award that year. Recently, there are 30 years of awards. 30 years. And this, I thought this was a spectacular picture that was captured and printed in the Dallas Morning News. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. I did a lot of writing. Oh, I was wherever my kids were. This is a letter from Jimmy Krause, who was in Adrian or Kathy's, I think it was Adrian's, and he writes, "Thank you very much, Mrs. Seltzer, for chaperoning the graduation party at Kramer. We are also grateful for the decorations, were simply beautiful, yada, yada, yada. I enjoyed the party, and what you have done for us, we will never forget." So wherever my kids were, I was. So I was at Kramer with them. I was the founding person of Fanny Soblosky, BBG. I was with my kids when they were in Girl Scouts, and Robert was in Boy Scouts. So I was also very active as Sheriff Israel all those years in the education department, while Dr. Saul Katz, Oliver Shalom.
No, he's alive.
Huh?
Saul Katz is still
he
alive.
is, and he's in his 90s. That's
Mhm.
right. Oh,
Mhm.
bite my tongue. Anyway, worked at Sheriff Israel. Oh, one of the
President.
things that I worked on, and Peggy Lerner and Sonny Lerner, who are dear friends, wrote this. She reminded me of, we raised funds for the Dallas School of the Blind, and DFIE did that. And so Dallas Services for Blind Children and our sorority alumni did that. I don't know. There's so much still. And I think I did mention that I taught for 7 years at the Dallas Junior College level.
What schools?
I taught at Hillcrest and Brookhaven and the one across from where I lived on Abrams. What was the name of that school?
Richland?
Richland. So those are the 3 schools. And Eastfield, I taught at Eastfield though too. So that's it. I can't think of, I'm sure I'll remember something else after we.
You want to talk a little bit about the jobbers? Just mention the Jewish jobbers.
With the Jewish jobbers, they were all Jewish. And they're the ones who help these little stores stay in business by buying merchandise from people like my father and my mother, because they worked together. Did I show you a picture of my mother and dad on their 50th wedding anniversary?
You were going to.
I'd love to do that. Oh, and I also went to SMU. I went back to SMU after Mark was gone, and I took ballet and broadcast journalism. And I made an A in broadcast journalism, and me, the dancer, made a B in ballet. And I went to my teacher and I said, "How could you give me a B when I'm such a good dancer?" And he said, or she said, "Well, you were never here." I traveled a lot then. But look at this gorgeous picture.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful? And they gave the most beautiful parties, always at the Fairmont and whatever. Terrific. And the one thing I haven't shown you is I also went to Hungary, and Tony Curtis donated something in Hungary, and the synagogue was being redone there, but I went to the synagogue there where the Jews were buried there. So here's a plaque from Marquise, Who's Who, and this was in 1997, recognizing me as a biographical record in Who's Who in America, 51st edition. And here is one of their books. And this is from 1990. Oh, it's heavy. Here's one of the books, 1996 edition, Who's Who in the World, and I think I've been in every book since. So it's really gratifying. It's so gratifying to know that Tikkun Olam, that's what Jews are all about. I don't know why I get teary-eyed when I talk about it, but we Jews have made such important contributions to this country and to the world. And Tikkun Olam means leave the world a better place than when you came. And I hope I've done that.
Certainly have.
Thank you, Ginger.
Still doing it.
Thank you, Debbie.